George and Linda Fowler grew up with their younger siblings Brian and Judy in a classic prairie railway station. In fact, the Fowlers were one of the last families on the Canadian National to do so, at the station in St. Paul, Alberta. Their father Fred, who began his career on the CNR in 1943, was born in the station at Riley, Alberta, and lived his life in stations. Fred, with his brother Bill, who also went railroading, were sons of George Fowler Sr., a pioneer railroader who began his career on the Intercolonial Railway in eastern Canada, worked on the CPR in northern Ontario, came west with the construction of the Grand Trunk Pacific, and finally ended up on the Canadian Northern Railway at Entrance, the gateway to the Canadian Rockies. In 1949, Fred and his wife Anne were married in Big Valley, Alberta, where his father was agent. The Fowlers enjoyed their early married life at the station at Warden, or the honeymoon cottage as Fred would jokingly call it, and eventually the Fowlers moved on to Galahad, Vilna, and Houston, BC, and then finally to St. Paul, where for George and Linda, a unique way of life was experienced that now has long vanished.
Living, 15 feet from the rail line, in the wintertime, the snowplows would go down the subdivision to Heinsberg. They'd park the engine right beside the bedrooms, right there, 15 feet away, and rumbling all night long. Our family has a long tradition of working on railways. The operator may be called upon real quick to respond to a situation in the office. And so if he's living in the office, fantastic. We can ring him up and away we go. As a family, living space was available at next to no cost. Plus you had a B&B gang who would show up a couple times a year and look after your windows and maintenance around the yard. Coming into this Meeting Creek station, I'm reminded of how small the place was for 6 of us.
The fact that it was a public kind of environment sometimes bothered me. If you walked through the door from the living quarters into the public area, you had to be a proper young lady.
And station grounds are like one giant yard. They're at least a mile long and 200 or 300 feet wide. Our friends from town would love to gather at the station because no supervision, first of all, and no constraints on your behavior. Just run wild.
I mean, we'd be outside playing all the time, not on the tracks, obviously, but on one occasion, I heard a baby crying, and there was a little one in a blanket laying by the tracks. And so Mom and Dad took the child, tried to give some milk and a spoon. Anyway, they called the RCMP, and everything got sorted out there, but you just never knew what to expect when you went outside.
Well, Dad's responsibilities as agent operator, the first one was to make sure trains arrived and departed safely. Dad always prided himself in being able to transmit and receive Morse code messages. And in addition to that, he had dealings with the public. There was also a freight terminal. An express truck would arrive maybe 3 or 4 times a week. He had to make sure the books were balanced. There's no funny business going on with sticky fingers in the till. And he sold tickets on the passenger trains when they were running through his station.
Mother was a wonderful cook. In Houston, there would be a lot of gangs, train gangs that were work gangs. Mother used to get to know the cook on the gang, and between the two, they just put on wonderful meals for a lot of people. That would have been her main role. She's always a good support for Dad.
Back in the days in St. Paul, they used to ship bodies from Edmonton to St. Paul for funerals and whatnot. And sometimes the funeral people couldn't pick up the body in time, so it had to spend the night in the station, you see. Mom would send me to the freezers, where the freezers were in the freight sheds, you see. Open the door, turn the light on. Oh, hang on here. There's a rough box here on a cart, and I know exactly what's in the rough box. So you get what you want out of the freezer, and then you run back out of there. I don't think very many people had that experience of sleeping in a detached funeral home, shall we say.
My memory of that is a little different than yours.
Oh?
When I went into the freight shed, and you were behind me and I didn't know,
Oh,
you turn the light off when I'm halfway to the freezers and you close the door and lock it. Just one of many jokes that were played around the place. Traveling by train at no cost to the family, many times across Canada, staying in these wonderful CN hotels that today are, some of them are Fairmont hotels. I mean, we were very privileged that way. Mother and Dad made it wonderful. They were super parents. The fact that we grew up in this type of environment, as a child, you don't realize how different it is. And it's only now, like even talking about it, like, wow, yeah, I guess that was cool.
as the years went by, rail service disappeared. People, didn't send stuff by rail anymore. People weren't traveling by rail, so it was quite natural for all these points to be closed. Dad was just keeping one step ahead of the demolition team. Dad held the fort to the end.